Hello and welcome to Color Multimedia Enterprises. My name is Luke, also known as Tienery, and this is going to be day 2 of StoryDev 2, and we are going to be taking a look at applying a few things such as grid lines, background colors, etc. Just some basic customization options for this canvas, and perhaps moving on toward implementing a project management system for StoryDev 2, at least in its basic form. Now, yesterday, when we took a look at it, all we could really do is add an object to the screen and drag it around, right? That's all we could really do. And obviously, if you drag it around too fast, it tends to the cursor tends to, if you move too fast with the cursor will actually quite literally fall outside of the graphic and cause it to stop, which is probably something that we have to deal with at some point. Not sure how to deal with it just yet, but it's something to think about. But we're not going to be taking a look at optimization right now. It's going to be just simply getting things functional and working first, before we move on to optimization, obviously. So, first things first, what I'm going to be doing is just adding some basic customization options to the canvas. Now, obviously customization isn't particularly anything new per se. I mean, basically what I'm saying is it's not going to be particularly interesting when we implement it. It's just going to be grid lines where you get to show grid lines. That's going to be 32 by 32 or something, right? And then you're going to have a background color and other things with that. So let's go ahead and just display a few things as some properties that will allow us to modify things. So let's make this property. Make show grid lines here. So it shouldn't be too difficult to implement this, of course. So I'm just going to return show grid lines, and in the set call, we are going to set show grid lines to value, and I'm just going to invalidate when I can eventually type. There we go. Okay, and then there's a few others that I'd like to put in. So there's back color. So I'm going to say private color, back color, like that. Now, back color is already a property, so I'm going to be overriding it. The reason why is because what I basically want to do is make sure that when we do modify the back color, we invalidate the component. So let's modify these and then invalidate. Simple enough. We're also going to have a grid color so that we can identify. I keep typing in var. I think the reason why is because I keep thinking this is Hakes and it isn't. It's C#. Okay, grid color. Going to get, and we are going to return grid color, as you might imagine, and set, you guessed it, we are just going to set that value there. Obviously we're not exactly doing anything with these properties yet, so we're not exactly doing anything particularly interesting. We've also got grid cell size, so let's implement that as well. And this is going to be a size of grid cell size. Oops. Again, I need to actually type first. So we're going to get return cell size. Oh. It might actually help to create the variable first. Grid cell size, like that. So grid cell size, and again, when we set it, we would just want to set it and then invalidate. Now, what I'm also going to do is a bit of validation. So I'm going to say if value.height is equal to 0, or perhaps if we were to set it to -1 or minus any negative number, then we probably want to check that as well. So let's make sure that we have that as well. So it's going to be less than or equal to 0, and the same for the width as well, less than or equal to 0. And if that is the case, then we're just going to use a default size. In this case, it's just going to be 32 and 32. I'm surprised they're not unsigned ints, to be honest, because obviously you don't want it less than 0. But never mind. It's grid cell size value. Okay. And snap to grid. Now we don't really need a private variable for this one, so I am just going to do snap to grid, and it can be sort of a variable in and of itself, right? And that's exactly what that's doing. Okay, so those properties are now set up, but we're not exactly doing anything with them. So first of all, what I'd like to do is set up a few defaults in here. So I'm going to say show grid lines. That's going to be equal to false to start with. I am going to set up the grid, because by default it's actually an empty size and we didn't want that, so we want it to be 32 by 32 to start with. Let's say the grid color is going to be of a color grey. In British English, grey is actually spelled with an E instead of an A. So it's a bit weird. And color from ARGB. For the back color, let's say it's going to be 34, 34, 34. So it's sort of like a very dark grey. Okay. So now that we've set up some defaults, let me try that again. Let me take a look at some code. So in our paint function, what we're going to be doing is applying the grid lines, right? So we're going to basically check to see if that show grid lines is true. And if it is, then we want to basically iterate over the X and Y and check to see if the grid cell size, when we effectively match that on both the X and Y axis, that we actually draw the lines appropriately, if that makes sense. So for the X axis, we'll say var X is equal to 0, or 1 rather. X is going to be less than width, and then X plus plus. So on the X axis, basically what I want to do is, if X is going to be sort of divided by grid cell size, so basically what I want to do is get the remainder of that, and I want the remainder to be 0, because when it is, what I want to do is say e.graphics.drawLine, right, And then I'm going to put in a new pen, and that pen is going to be the grid color that we were looking for. I'm going to say new point, so we want it on the x-axis, and obviously starting at the point of 0 on the y-axis. And the end point is going to be x once again, followed by the height. So it's basically drawing a line from the very top of the window all the way down, or rather this canvas, not the actual window itself. So that's that, and then we pretty much just do exactly the same effect for the y-axis. So it's pretty much just the same thing, just flipping a few values around. So if y percentage grid cell size, that's grid color, not cell size. And then height equal to 0. And we'll say e.graphics.drawLine. Once again, we'll pass in that new pen, grid color. Could optimize it slightly and just have one create a new pen outside of the for loops, but it doesn't really matter that much. It's not really going to make that much of a difference, if I may be honest. It's all double buffered anyway. New points, and then I'm going to pass in the width followed by the y there, and that will basically draw a line from. Wait, no. This line is from. Is this? Yeah, this line is top to bottom. This line is left to right. I got confused between the heights and widths of the for loops, but yeah, this line is left to right. This line is top to bottom. Okay, so if we wanted to see that, what we could do is go into main form, and if we rebuild, because we can see this at design time anyway, so in your own time. Why is it taking so long? Jesus Christ. Okay. So now we see the color that we saw, that we set inside of the constructor here. So that back color is now 34, 34, 34. We don't see the grid yet. But if we scroll down here and we set show grid lines true, we can now see it. And that's 32 by 32. What if I set it to 64 by 64? And oh yeah, did that? Wait, did we not make sure that? Why is it? Why would you do that? Oh, there we go. It's working now. So we are invalidating it properly. Wait, grid cell size. No, we're not. Not invalidating it at all. Might be a good idea. So we invalidate it every time we change the grid cell size. So let's say it's 48 by 48. So in between. Maybe you need to save it first before it changes. But for some reason, every time you save it, Visual Studio stops responding. Why? Really weird. Shouldn't happen at all. But yeah, whatever. It's never happened before. But anyway. Okay. So now that we've got that done, let's implement this snap to grid functionality. So let's go down to the mouse up. So basically what I'm going to do is say when I release the mouse button after I've selected an object and moved it around, once I've released the mouse button, what I want it to do is basically snap to the closest cell that the top left corner is in, right? If that makes sense. So the way I'm going to do that is check to see if the selected object is not null and snap to grid is in fact true, right? Obviously, first of all, I need to cast that selected object to a GDI object so that I can actually use it. And then I've got two things that I need to do. I need to first round the object's location to the width and height of the grid cell size, and I'll show you that. I'll show you why in a moment. So closest x is going to be equal to math.round, and this is going to take a float and casted dot x divided by grid cell size width var closest y is going to be equal to math dot round, again cast to a float, casted dot y divided by grid cell size dot height. Why do we do that? Why do we do that? So the reason why, I'll actually bring up paint.net to show you what I mean by that. So when we have, let's say, the position of our object on the screen, so by the time paint.net opens, I will eventually be able to show you what I mean. Right. Okay. So imagine you've got a grid on the screen like this, right? Obviously this is 1 by 1 pixels, so it isn't exactly great, but nevertheless, imagine that each object on this screen, right, is this 1 pixel here. It really doesn't matter where I put it. So we've got this 1 pixel here, right? Or let's say this rectangle is 32 by 32. Just imagine it's 32 by 32. Now, let's say I've got this screen, right? I've got this rectangle here. It practically is a rectangle. Square. And this point here, let me use a different color. This point here is the point that I want to snap to, effectively. So in order to determine that, what I basically need to do is identify the width and height of the cell size so that I can determine what position I am in when I take a look at the top left corner of the rectangle that I've selected, if that makes sense. Once I've done that, I can then multiply that result by the width and height of the grid size and cast it back to an int in order for this object to snap to this point, right? If that makes sense. So this point here. So let's go back into here and do casted.x. We're going to cast to an int closest.x multiplied by grid cell size dot width, and I'll do the same for the y as well. Int closest y multiplied by grid cell size dot height, and that will actually do the snap, and then we need to invalidate in order for it to take effect. Why is Visual Studio so slow? I really don't get that. But anyway, let's take a look at that effect. So let's grab an object on the screen. So at the moment there is no snapping going on, right, as you can see. So if I were to go back into the canvas, and or alternatively what I could do is just go into the properties over here and do snap to grid is equal to true, save it. Eventually, once it loads, why are you so slow? What's wrong with you? So let's build it eventually once it loads. See, this is the reason why I want to use Jai, because Jai is probably going to be a lot faster than this. So when I move, it is going to snap. Now, you're probably wondering, if I were to move the top left point to here, it actually snaps to this corner over here, instead of the corner that you would expect it to snap to, if that makes sense. Now, at first glance you might think, well, that's unusual behavior, but when you think about it, it actually does make sense, because what you want is, if you wanted the object to snap to a particular point, then you would put the top left corner of that rectangle in that cell. And that actually makes sense, right? When you think about it. Now, I can actually delete this object, so let's also implement that as well. So, what I'm going to do is just simply say, hang on. There is also a key up function which you're supposed to do. So first of all, let's put in private void, or actually no, let's make it public. Public void delete object, and we are going to take a iDrawable, no, a GDI object rather, object. Shouldn't really call it object actually. OBJ. Call it OBJ. Makes a bit more sense. Okay. So in the delete object function, all we want to do is basically remove it from this objects and invalidate. And what I'm also going to do is just simply add the key up event to the canvas so that we can actually delete it using the delete key. So let's go into here, go over to the key up event. If e.keycode is keys delete, I am just going to say delete object, whatever the selected object is, so we have to cast it because it is just an object. Select the object like that, and then save. And once it eventually works, this is terrible by the way, I really don't know why it's doing that. It might help that I restart my computer, but still. Anyway, so now that we've got most of the functionality of the canvas done, what I now want to do is move on to something a bit different. So in here, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to cut this canvas, and I want to put in a split container here. And I'm going to not quite paste it back in just yet. I want to add a panel, so I'm going to add a few things here in a minute. Let's dot that to the top. Okay, so I'm going to paste it in here, and inside this panel, let's modify the back color, and let's make it that color. Why not? why not? Okay. So, what I'm going to do is add some checkboxes, which is basically just going to toggle the show grid lines and the snap to grid functionality. That's all it's going to do. So CHB show grid lines, right? I might want to actually change the text on it. Show grid lines. Now, by default, it's going to be true. So let's make this the default as well. So all I'm going to say is canvas1.show grid lines. Grid lines. There we go. And that is just going to be equal to the checked state of show grid lines. There's actually a property called check state, so don't get confused by that. And then I'm going to use another one as well, which is going to be snap to grid. Okay. Snap to grid. And when we click on that, we want to use the snap to grid checked state. Checked as in the actual checked property, not the check state property. Right. So that's just basically a trigger, a toggle even. It's probably a better word to use. So I'm gonna just remodify those to its defaults again. Right. So what I want to do is I want up here a series, well, not necessarily a series of things, whatever you would want to call it. What I'm going to do is, in fact, let's, first of all, let's add another split container in here, because in the, might not be a good idea. Let's delete that. That's annoying. Right. So in the current project, what you've got is a split container here that divides the property box and effectively what's a list of scenes that you can navigate between. So let's change the orientation of this. Where is it? There. Want it horizontal. There we go. Move that up, down even. I'm going to add another panel. It says auto hide, but it doesn't actually auto hide. It's really weird. Right. So I am going to dock this container to the top. And again, I definitely prefer auto hide, but at the same time, it's really annoying. It doesn't obey you half the time. It's really weird. Okay. Let's. So I'm going to add a combo box. I'm going to add it over here. So this combo box is basically just going to be the types of things that you can save. So you can be able to save scenes, conversations, etc. Right? And this is actually going to be a drop-down list. Let's also add a button over here. And I am going to make this button just a plus. So basically what that's going to do is it's going to give us the ability to add scenes to the object. The list of sort of things that we'll have in this container. So you can navigate between scenes and conversations and other such things. So this is going to be btn add. Complete that and resize it a bit so that it doesn't look weird. Problem is I cannot see a damn thing on this screen. Right. I am going to change the anchor a bit as well. So this is going to anchor to the top right so that it looks a bit better. So let's go ahead and check that. Oh, one thing I forgot to do is because when I cut it, I think all the event handlers are stopped. So that's obviously working. So as you can see, the this button is now anchored to the top right instead of the top left. Okay, so oh, the event handlers do still work. Okay, fair enough. Don't know why it's so slow. Very, very slow. I don't think it helps that I'm recording. I don't think it helps. But nevertheless, it's still working, so that's fine. Now, what I also want to do is I want to add a custom component that will effectively allow us to add a series of scenes to this form. So I'm going to dock this to fill. And there's a thing called category item. Now, it's not particularly anything fancy. It's just a case of when we click on it, it does something, right? If that makes sense. So it's not going to be particularly interesting. So let's just get it out the way and move on to something that's a bit more interesting, which would be implementing the actual scene functionality. So this is going to be called category item. Whoops. Category item here. And inside of this inside of this category item, I am going to add a label. It's not, yeah. Please just work. What the hell is wrong with you? Why is this computer so slow? Wow. Really does feel like I'm using dial-up connection again. It's not good. It really isn't. But anyway, let's add a few things to this. This label is going to be just simply the title of what we want it to be. Let's just call it something else. Call it text maybe. So inside of the code, what for God's sake. You know, I might actually just stop here because this is so slow. I don't like it. Right, whatever. I'm just going to add some simple properties, and in these properties, I am just going to access those. Did I not? I didn't actually modify that. Oh, it's right. It's LBL title without the underscore. Anyway. Oh well. So that's going to be set to value. Again, this isn't particularly interesting, but let's just put it all in anyway. So I'm also going to have a selected property here that's going to determine whether or not this is the selected category item. Not going to be doing anything in the constructor. Now I'm going to be adding a few mouse events. All we're literally going to do is just change the background color. Literally, that's all we're going to do. So let's go into here. I'm also going to select that label as well so that it applies to both. So we want mouse up, mouse down, I believe. mouse down, mouse enter, and mouse leave. Let's just add them all first before we go ahead and implement the functionality. And there's one more, which is click. Actually, I think there's also double click as well. Yeah, there is. So let's add that as well. Double click there you are. Okay. So in mouse event, we are just going to change the color. So in mouse enter, I am going to change the color to yellow. That's all I'm going to do there. In mouse down, back color is going to be gold. In mouse up, it's going to be the color yellow again, as you might imagine. Color yellow. And in mouse leave, there's going to be a bit more to this. So basically, if it's selected, we want to keep the color gold, right? And otherwise, we want the back color to remain what it was previously. So in this case, it's going to be light gray, like that. Now in the category click event, what I basically want to do is iterate over all of the controls of the parent and make sure that when we select this category item, we want all of the other category items in the parent to be set to false, if that makes sense. So parent.controls. Now I want to basically make sure to get the type first, because you never know. There could be other types in the parent controls. Not that there ever will be, but it's still best to do that check anyway, just to be safe. So if the control is not equal to this, then we want to make the category item that we're looking for and change the selected to false. And then all we do outside is say selected is equal to true. Now in a double click, what I'm going to do is create an event that is a derived double click. So basically, because of the way that these controls work, when you apply a double click to the user control, it only applies to the user control that you assign that event handler to. Now, because I've applied the double click to both the user control and the label, it will apply to both. But the way that but if I were to assign a double click outside of the scope and assign it to the user control, it only applies to the user control, as I mentioned. It doesn't apply to the event handlers of any other control within that control, if that makes sense. So even though the double click event is in fact added inside the scope of main form, for example, then if you were to double click while you double click the label within the control, that event handler doesn't actually get dispatched. The actual event doesn't get dispatched, which can be annoying. So in order to get around that, what I'm going to be doing is creating my own event, which is going to be called derived double click. It's just going to pass in the exact same parameters as you would expect, and then I'm just going to call public event derived double click, derived double click. Basically in here all I'm going to say is if derived double click is not null, then derived double click, I'm going to pass in this followed by a new event args. That is all we're going to do to category item. And eventually once it saves, we'll be able to move on. Okay, right. So what I'm going to do now is check my code once again. So we've got this concept of a project, right? So we want to be able to create projects and we want to add things to this. Let's just resize that to make it look a bit easier. So in here, I'm just going to add the item scenes. Just to add that there. There's also going to be conversations as well, but I'm not going to implement that yet. Now, when we double click on that, when we click on this button here, while we are in the application, what we want to do is basically add an item to the scenes. So what I'm going to do is create a temporary list, private list, and that is basically just going to be of category item, right? Categories like that. Let's just initialize that for the time being. Don't really need No, I'll do it this way. Okay, so basically what we want to do is when we add that object, when we click on this add button, what we want to do is we would have a form that comes up and we would basically just type in a name of something that we want to add, and then it will just add to that list and then populate on the inside of the panel that we will eventually create. So let's say add item for this new form here in your own time. So let's just modify it slightly. I'm going to get rid of these because we don't need them. Oops. Let's go into here. I'm going to make it so that we don't give the user the ability to resize it. And I am just going to drag a few controls over here and add simply title. So whatever the title of the scene is going to be, or whatever the item might be. What might also be a good idea is actually separating the values there. Okay, so pass in the title, put on a text box here like this. And all I basically want to do is have two buttons, one called cancel, one called OK or add, something like that, right? So we're just going to say cancel here, btn cancel. Oops. This isn't a particularly interesting day and I do apologize for that, but still it's boilerplate stuff that needs to be done, even though I get bored sometimes. So basically all we're going to do, let me just resize that so that you can see what's going on. So all I want to do is when people click on that cancel, we just want to close it. I should just wait until Visual Studio decides to explode. And that would probably be the most interesting of events in this episode, probably, most likely. Just got to point that out. Anyway, let's excuse me, I do apologize. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to add an event here, and it's going to be on add, and I want to pass in string title, and this on add is just going to be on add like that, or added maybe. Oops. So when we go into here, I want to basically say if added is not null, then I just want to say added, we pass in whatever the title of it is, txt title. Oh, we didn't actually assign it that, did we? Txt title, like that. So when we go back into here, I'm just going to pass in that title text, like that. And then we want to obviously close the form as well, eventually. Wow. I just don't know what it is with Visual Studio. I really don't. What I'm also going to do is when we load it, we want to bring focus to the title so that we don't waste the user's time. It's just a bit of a convenience thing. It's not anything particularly fancy, but still. So in here, all I want to do is basically add an object. So var add scene is going to be equal to new, or maybe I think it should just be called add, because we could be adding anything for all we know. So new add item, add dot added. So we're going to add an event. I'm just going to generate one automatically. And when we do have that event added, all we want to do is basically add a new category item here, add it to that list, reverse it, and then add it to the controls of this. So we probably want to rename that panel to something a bit more meaningful. So let's say contents in your own time. Right. So in here, I am basically going to say, and first of all, we might actually want to show the dialogue. So basically, we're going to check what that selected item is, because there could be other ones as well. So if it's 0, then obviously it's going to be scenes. And what I want to do is I want to just double check something. Now let's now I do have this function called populate list, which is quite useful. So basically all that's going to do is it's going to iterate through each of these items and categories and just add it to the controls. So it's just going to be like for each var category in categories, right? And then what we would do is just say P&L contents.controls.add, right? Category. That's all we're going to do there. And what we also probably want to do is say P&L.controls.clear. Now, in order to prevent flickering, what we can also do is say P&L.controls.suspend layout. There. Once we've added them all, we then say P&L contents.resume layout, right? Eventually, once you load, I might actually be able to show something. Right, so all I'm going to do is basically say new category item, and I'm going to pass in that title. Oops, title there, which is going to be title. Oops, equals title, like that. Oops. That's all we're going to do. So let's go ahead and take a look at those results. once it builds, I'll be able to show you the results. So this is what it looks like. So if I click on this, we've got this title here. Let's call it main menu. Oh, I forgot to assign accept button to this form, but never mind. So I click on add. It, for some reason, doesn't do anything. Oh, I forgot to add it. I need to select scenes in order for it to work. So let's try that again. We add it. Oh. What? Huh. Interesting. So let's go into here. Oh, we forgot to populate. That might help. That might help. Populate list. That might help. Okay. So let's go into here. Eventually, once it builds and loads, we'll be able to see the results. So let's click on this again because we'll need to do it anyway. So main menu. Click on add, and there we go. We have now successfully created this main menu. Oh, got through quite a bit. So this is Friday, so I think what would be most logical is I start next Wednesday with day 3. The reason why I say that's probably the most logical thing to do is because I started a bit late in the week, and it doesn't really make sense to start on Monday with day 3. So I want to make things a bit more even, so I'm going to start next week on Wednesday for day 3 on onwards. Okay. So thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed watching this video / tutorial, and I will see you next time.